Leadership, purpose, service. This is Fulfilling the Dream with Wayman Brett. Your path to greatness is not simply paved with the grinding feet of persistence. Through motivating stories and personal testimonials, gain the insight you need to overcome life's biggest challenges and break through those barriers that hinder you. So when opportunity knocks at your door, you'll be ready. Welcome to Fulfilling the Dream.
Well, good day and good afternoon to everybody that's out there in podcast land. Again, we're hoping for an interesting conversation today with a gentleman that really needs no introduction. His name is Bob Woodson. He is the founder and president of the Woodson Center and also 1776 Unites and Voices of Black Mothers United. Bob is frequently featured on many outlets, C-SPAN, CNN, Meet the Press. He's contributed to The Hill, the Washington Examiner, and has just received a number of awards. He's written several books, one that I'm really fond of, and looking forward to his discussion today about the book called Lessons from the Least of These, the Woodson Principles. And I got a chance to meet Bob when he was here in Grand Rapids, Michigan a few months ago at the Ford Foundation, where he and other guests were here talking about the work that we're doing in grassroots community and what they were doing to change the game and what they were doing to uplift people and to improve their opportunities in our communities. And I just fell in love with him. So since that time, I visited Bob in Washington, D.C. My wife and I visited with him, and he granted me the opportunity to interview him today on the podcast show. So I'm so thrilled. Bob, how are you today?
Oh, I'm just fine. Every day is a good day for me.
So are you enjoying the spring weather in Washington, D.C.? And
yes, sir.
hopefully...
Finally it's gotten here. So I'm really enjoying. This is a great time of year.
Yeah.
People are despairing, but I don't.
Well, your whole track record, you seem like you never despair. And I have just fallen in love with the work that you're doing and looking forward to what you have to say about your book. So Bob, let's start out. Give us some background. You grew up in Philadelphia, I believe. And could you give us some of the background you're growing up in Philadelphia in the 1960s?
Well, I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, during the Depression, 1937, and it's a low-income, blue-collar, black neighborhood. As I said before, 98% of the households had a man and a woman raising children. Elderly people could walk safely in those communities without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren. I never heard a gun fired one time, never heard of children being murdered in their cribs. So even though we were living in tough times in the segregated Philadelphia, as it was throughout the country, the community that we were in was a faith community. Everybody, even if you didn't go to church, you pretended to be a Christian. And so we had solid relationships there. In fact, the studies that we have done reveals that even though Black communities were, that racism was enshrined in law, we had no political representation, that we were in the grips of a depression. But during the 10 years of that depression, between 1930 and 1940, the Black community had the highest marriage rate of any group in society. And so all my life, I've grown up around resilience and perseverance against great odds. And my dad died when I was 9, leaving my mother with a 5th grade education and 5 children to raise. which means that I had to cleave to my peers. There's a group of 6 fellas. We call ourselves the fellas. And so I understand why children join gangs, because when you don't have the nuclear family or your dad is missing, you need some kind of alternative support. Fortunately, my mother equipped me with the kind of values that I chose good friends.
Yeah.
There are 3 of us still alive today. And so it gave me an understanding of why young men who are aimless, what it takes for young men to survive, coming from a single parent household, coming from a low income neighborhood, and so it was my response to that. They were a year older than me, and so when they graduated, I was unaffiliated.
Yeah.
And so I quit high school at 17 and went into the military at a time and found myself in Mississippi in a training base, and which exposed me for raw racism. And then after completing flight training there, I went to the missile base in Florida again, and I finished my high school training through a GED program. And I took some college courses in math. So I have 12 credits from the University of Miami when I was in the military at a time when I couldn't walk on the campus.
Wow. 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 How did you get through all of that, Bob? I mean, what was the determining factor for you to rising above all of that back in the day? What were the lessons?
Well, one of the fundamental lessons that I had to learn early is when again, as I told you, I was 17 when I quit high school. I was just 3 months into my 17th birthday. I quit high school, the first time that I'd ever really traveled out of the city. And I'm suddenly thrown with people from different backgrounds. My first Southern accent. I'm meeting a German youth, a guy who was in Hitler Youth. I met a Jewish guy whose parents perished in the Holocaust. So I'm thrown together with people I never thought I would. This is funny, though, but when I went into the military, I believed that Black people were a majority in America.
Wow. Because of where you grew up.
Because all I saw were Black folks. And so suddenly I'm going into the military. There are 400 being inducted in a week. And we're only about 8% of the population. My flight was 80 people and only 5 Blacks. So that was a cultural shock for me. It was a shock. But the lessons in that, and I'll get to this, is that when I came home on leave for the first time from Florida, I came on the train and I spent all my money, partied up my money. And I went to my mother the Friday morning. I was supposed to be back in base on Monday. And I said, I need car fare back to the base. She said, how did you get here? And I told her. She said, then you need to get back the best way you can. I was very bitter, but guess what? It took me 2 days to hitchhike 1,000 miles.
Wow. Wow.
And I was bitter at her for 4 months. But that was a very profound lesson that your destiny is determined by what you do. And you cannot depend on anyone else to rescue you from your foolish decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. You have hit on something that's in your book that I pulled out. And when you wrote the book, Lessons from the Least of These, what prompted that book? Why did you write it? And what was on your heart and mind at the time?
Because I really believe that, the character of a nation or even an individual or an organization is determined by how we treat the least of God's children. And when I look at how we have treated poor people in this country, that we have parachuted into their communities remedies coming from the outside. That's what happened on the poverty programs. We created a commodity out of poor people. We
Wow.
saw poverty, and what we did was we spent $22 trillion on poverty in the last 60 years. 70 cents of every one of those dollars didn't go to the poor, but those who serve the poor. And they asked not which problems are solvable, but which ones are fundable. So if and most of those were trained professionals from our universities, we would parachute into these communities programs designed by outsiders that were motivated by what they could get funded, not which problems could they solve. And so it didn't matter whether the intervention coming from on high was from the left or the right. Secretary Bill Bennett characterized, he said, when people on the left see poor people, they see a sea of victims, and people on the right see a sea of aliens.
Wow.
And so I realized that the real solutions to poverty cannot be found by looking to people on the right or the left, and that the poverty programs that have parachuted into all these professionals has done more to destroy the institutions that are in these communities that have served them over the decades. And so what I tried to do is flip the script, to look for a different source for solutions to the problems of poverty by going among the people suffering the problem.
Yeah.
All of the answers to poverty are contained within the community suffering the problem. If only we can go in, as I did, and we're an organization, to go in. If we say, for instance, that 70% of the Black households in our cities, urban centers, are raising children that are dropping out of school or in jail and on drugs, it means 30% are not. No one ever goes into the 30% of the households to find out what is it that is being done there that causes people to achieve against the odds. And so that's what my book describes, the process of looking at low-income communities through the prism of the glass is half full as opposed to the glass is half empty.
Yeah.
So we have found solutions. And we also, Wayman, apply the principles that operate in the market economy. In our market economy, only 3% of the people are entrepreneurs, but they generate 70% of the jobs.
That's true.
And entrepreneurs, according to David Birch at MIT, entrepreneurs tend to be C students, not A students.
Yeah,
See, A students come back and teach, C students endow. Or as A.D. Gaston, one of my favorite, he's Alabama's first Black millionaire. He had a sixth grade education. He said, it's better to say I is rich than I am poor. And so I use that analogy, but it only takes a small number of social entrepreneurs in communities that have developed unique ways of addressing poverty. And if you go in and look for that small cohort of people who are the social entrepreneurs, and we do what the marketplace does, is a venture capitalist brings not only money, but also managerial expertise, so that a business that starts in someone's garage ends up becoming a Fortune 500 company. Well, we need to follow the same trajectory when we're intervening in the social economy by taking a few people who have demonstrated that they have solutions, provide them with money, but also managerial support so that they can grow from helping 10 people to 100 people, and from there to 1,000. And so that's kind of been the approach that I have taken. So I wrote about those 10 principles that help guide people when they're looking for solutions among the people experiencing the problem.
Yeah. And you talk in your book about the excuses that we make. And sometimes, and that's one of my pet peeves, is often we always look to find solutions outside of ourselves, and we don't look internally. And you talk about that in the book a lot, about looking inside a community. And I think that's one of our downfalls. We oftentimes are looking elsewhere instead of looking at what we can do for ourselves. And yeah. So we're at a crossroads, I believe, and then you believe.
No, but we are at a crossroads in that we're looking in the wrong places for the right answers. And so what I'm trying to do is guide people to that elitism is the biggest barrier that we have to solution. We have this assumption that only smart people have the answers to the problems. And that if someone is untutored, they're unwise. And so that's the biggest barrier. There is an economist, James C. Scott. He wrote a book called Seeing Like a State. He says there are two types of knowledge. There's episteme knowledge, which is knowledge that you can teach in a classroom. And then there's metis knowledge, which is common sense knowledge. Episteme knowledge is something you can teach somebody to maneuver a ship across an ocean. You can teach that in the classroom.
Yeah.
But once that ship gets to the harbor of Baltimore or New York or Philadelphia, the captain turns it over to a harbor master. And that is a local captain that has equipped with metis knowledge. There's no textbooks on the Boston or the Baltimore harbor. It's only by common experience, common sense experience, and he knows where all the jetties are and and so that captain turns it over. But low-income people are like harbor masters. They know their community. The harbor master in Baltimore may not know how to maneuver a ship into the New York harbor. And so grassroots leaders are harbor masters. They know their community. They have established bonds of trust with people who are in crisis. Yeah. And they are able to harvest that trust to come up with unique ways of challenging people to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob, I remember when I was working on a project and we were attempting to build the human services complex here in our community. And we found out that the people in the community did have the answers. We pulled them together and they've helped us to figure out how do we supplant this 133,000 square foot facility that was going to help people. And I'm proud to say that it all worked out good. And we have, I think, remedied a lot of problems. We're going to push that support out of the community. And I'm glad we were able to figure it out, but they had the solutions right there. You're absolutely right. We listened to them. And fulfilling the dream, for me is about finding these gifted leaders that are in our communities and in our past that we can draw upon inspiration from. And I believe you're one of those people. Martin Luther King is one of those people. And I wonder, Bob, could you talk about your vision for the Woodson Center and how it mirrors Dr. King's dream? And are they the same? Is it because I wonder sometimes and I've listened to you before, are we saying the same thing today as he was back when he was pushing for change and dealing with poverty issues and so forth? Could you enlighten us on that?
One of my young colleagues, Delano Squires, I think summarized what the challenges that we face today when he says this whole race grievance issue and the demonization of American values is really coming from a small minority of people. They're, on the one side, they're guilty white progressives who are seeking absolution from crimes they never committed. Mm-hmm. And entitled rich blacks, well-educated, who are seeking absolutions from injustice they never suffered. And there are two types of people engaged in this attack on the fundamental values of the country. There are those that are ill-informed and those that are ill-intentioned. I start from the premise that most people are ill-informed, and therefore, if you just give them the right information, then they will change and migrate over to supporting these principles. And that's why we wrote the book 1776 Unites, to counter 1619, to provide people with an accurate accounting of history, to challenge the fundamental assaults on our values as a nation. The progressives are saying because America had slavery, that is to be forever defined by the sins of our past. And therefore, that's where they stop. And they use the rich legacy of the civil rights movement and the history and America's birth defect of slavery as a bludgeon against the country. And they're misappropriating the civil rights moral authority.
Yeah,
you saw this in Minnesota with George Floyd. They went in under the banner of seeking justice for blacks, and the first thing they do was burn the flag and burn the Bible, and conflate injustice against black with injustice against gays and women and everything else, as if those other groups wore the crown of thorns that blacks did. And so what we did was, again, publish this book, Red, White, and Black, and we developed school curriculum from it that has been downloaded, Wayman. 86,000 downloads we've had in a year.
Your curriculum, wow.
86,000 downloads in every state. So people are desperate to get accurate information. And that's why I think the majority are just ill-informed. And once they are informed, they will migrate to support the values of this nation. And again, go back to judging people not by the color of their skin or their sexual orientation, but by the content of their character.
Yeah, this nation is our nation, and you talk about that, and we should take pride in our history and the founding of this country. It was founded with the principles that all men should be created equal, and that's what Martin Luther King believed in, and that's what you believe in. But that gets misplaced. For some reason we think that there are two countries, and I find myself at times just so, I guess, confused and bothered about the fact that we have two sides of this story, and it should be one story. And I'm glad to hear you talk about that. Talk to us more about 1776 and the work that you're doing, trying to, I believe, share more essays and information with people about the founding of our country and how we should view ourselves in history of this country.
Yeah, you see, the progressive left is propagating this lie that the problems of out-of-wedlock births and violence that you see in black communities is a direct legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. That is just patently untrue. And so our essays, we went back into our history to find out, well, what was Black America's response to slavery and discrimination? Our response wasn't to be a victim. That following the Civil War, we looked at the state of the Black family. So one of our scholars looked at the records of 6 major plantations to determine what was the state of the Black family. 75% of those children were living with a man and a woman. 75%. So the nuclear family was critical to Black resistance to slavery.
Yeah.
And for 100 years, the Black family prevailed and was the primary institution that held us together.
Mm-hmm.
Only 10% were literate. And yet our churches set up Sabbath schools. And we were able to increase the literacy rate in 40 years from 10% to 70%.
Yeah.
And there were 20 blacks who were born slaves who died millionaires. One of them actually went back and purchased a plantation on which he was a slave and took in the destitute family of the slave master in an act of what I call radical grace. So the 1776 is just celebrating the rich history of how blacks achieved in the face of oppression and Jim Crow.
Yeah. So, Bob, talk to us about the Jim Crow era, and because I agree with everything you've said, but I think the question for some are going to be, well, slavery ended, but then Jim Crow came in, and it did undermine the opportunities for African Americans to succeed in especially in the South, but some of it was actually going on in the North. Could you talk about that so people can understand, even during Jim Crow, people did not make an excuse, and they were able to overcome even the onslaught of that ridiculous era that we lived through.
You know, that it is a fact that the sickest part of the body attracts the largest number of antibodies. That's just a fact of life. And it's the same in segregation. When government was hostile to us, we had to turn to ourselves. So when blacks were denied access to hotels and inns, we built our own. Every major city had a hotel. It was the Wallahaji in Atlanta, the Carver Hotel, and Calvert Hotel in Overtown, Miami. It was the St. Teresa in New York, the St. Charles in Chicago. I could go on and on. When we were denied access to schools, we built 5,000 Rosenwald Booker T schools. And as a consequence, we closed the education gap between 1920 and 1940 from 3 years to 6 months. In places like Chicago, in 1929, when we were denied access, we were redlined. We went to our churches with burial societies and took that capital and built 731 Black-owned businesses in just the Bronzeville section of Chicago. We had $100 million in real estate assets.
Wow.
We had our own railroad. How many people know that blacks started their own railroad in Baltimore in 1668? When 1,000 blacks were fired, we didn't whine and complain. What we did was borrow $10,000 and successfully operated our own railroad that went from Baltimore to Maine for 18 years. So there is a rich. We had golf clubs, country clubs. I can go on each of your own our own banks, insurance companies, our own universities, our own medical schools.
So in some ways, segregation ended, and part of Jim Crow was segregation in schools. And I think that maybe perhaps that hindered some of what you've just talked about. The fact that when we had the nucleus of those schools that had teachers and principals who were looked like me and you, they were oftentimes the heroes, the mentors that really cared and were able to help us, in fact, find our way. And unfortunately, today we've I think that we've lost that.
You're right. We were better off the first 50 years of this century. From the turn of the century up until 1960, we were better off than we are in the last 50 years. Think about this. More blacks killed other blacks in 1 year over the last 10 years than the Klan killed in 40 years. 1 year.
Oh my God.
We have a 9/11 every 6 months. And the president of the United States is going to stand up at Howard University and declare that white supremacy is the biggest threat that we have.
Yeah.
When just this past weekend, or Mother's Day weekend, 16 blacks were shot, 7 children. A 10-year-old girl was shot coming home from with her siblings and her parents, coming home from a Mother's Day celebration. She was shot and now is in critical condition.
Mm.
We never had this kind of challenge inside, where we've been so detached from our values that we devalue our life. America is in a moral and spiritual crisis, and it is not racial. We have a grace problem, not a race problem.
So, Bob, how do we change that in the minds of our president and for all of the leaders that are in a position to lead and to change things, to make community either better, to make our economy better? What do we do to get them to listen to that? I mean, I think, unfortunately, I think sometimes people are just not informed. You talked about that. So how do we get them to be more informed? What do we got to do?
Well, we got to do more than just whine about what the other side is doing.
Yeah.
And writing papers about it and complaining.
Yeah.
What we've got to do is we have to hold up examples of how old values are being applied in our present situation. There are social entrepreneurs, there are grassroots leaders in every community that have that spark of entrepreneurship. They have the trust and confidence of other people. We need to take what is happening in our communities that is working, and we need to invest in it the way we did back then. If we were able to achieve in the face of segregation and Jim Crow, we need to go back and be inspired by what was done back in those times and find their counterpart today.
Yeah.
If your viewers could go into 60 Minutes, go into YouTube and type in Bertha Gilkey, 60 Minutes.
Okay.
This is a group we work with in St. Louis that took a public housing project that was overrun with drug addicts and violence, gangmen, and the residents took charge of it themselves and established their own resident management corporation and drove the drug dealers out and rebuilt it. It was so peaceful that market rate housing was built right across the street from it.
Wow, that's amazing.
And there's another video we have at the Woodson Center. The same thing was done in Washington, D.C., where a 680-unit public housing project sent over 900 kids to college and eliminated teen pregnancy. We really need to study the success that is among us right now to find out how can we take what has been done on a small scale and invest in it so that we began to expand it, islands of excellence, and expand it out.
Well, and then educate people about what those excellence are, where they are, and to do more of that. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. You're only as smart as the information that you have in front of you. I mean, if you don't know, then what happens a lot of times, people make decisions, they go off on different tracks, and they don't even know that they're losing the war, they're losing ground, they're not solving the problem at all. And you've figured it out, Bob. I think that we need to hear more of what your recipe for changing America today. And so how do we get along with that? How do we manifest more of what you're thinking and what you're doing? I mean, you're in Washington, D.C., right?
Yeah.
You're not here in Michigan. So what do we do?
But we're all over the country. We have about 3,000 grassroots groups, leaders in 39 states that are part of our network. And they are created small. They're Black, they're white, they're Native American. In all of the 43 years that I've run the center, we've had conferences and retreats. racial animus never came up one time.
Mm-hmm.
Not once at our gatherings. Why? Because people who are really living in challenging communities, who are struggling with overcoming brokenness in their lives, they are not concerned about racism or anything else. They just want to know, how can I overcome this brokenness in my life?
Yeah.
And so that's why we're working with Pepperdine University to establish the Center for the Study of Resilience. We just need to, like Jesus did when he was on his way to the home of Cyrus,
Mm-hmm.
because his 13-year-old daughter had died.
Mm-hmm.
But when he got to the door, there were mourners who get paid to mourn. So they had no interest in him coming. And there were other naysayers who said to him, "Oh, she's dead. Why are you going to waste your time?" The first thing Jesus did is get these naysayers out the way. So the first thing you got to do is criticism is healthy. Cynicism is destructive. And so you first got to rid yourself of relationships that are cynical and surround yourself with people who are hopeful. And also, you should look for examples of people who are achieving against the odds. This mom that I read about, who raised two daughters in a homeless shelter for 3 years, they were sleeping in her car and sleeping in homeless shelters. The kids were studying by the light of her cell phone. And they graduated and went to Spelman as sophomores, because one graduated valedictorian, the other salutatorian. And they started Spelman as sophomores because they took so many advanced placement courses. That mother and those girls need to be celebrated.
Yes.
Scholars ought to be interviewing them, dissecting, learning from them. And there are other examples that are out there where people are achieving against the odds. But you've got to look for them. But you got to look for them. You got to, first of all, you got to believe that they exist.
Yeah.
And then we do. Why not they honor that banquets that we have? Instead of just celebrating somebody with a PhD who has written a book about something, why can't we celebrate the accomplishments of ordinary people? What we did for 7 years is we had what we call achievement against the odds. We went all over the country looking for people who have achieved against the odds. We would identify 200 and then screen down to 7. And then I would send a videographer to spend a day with each of them. And then we would invite their families to a big banquet in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And then all night we would feature what they did. We called it Low Income Oscars Night.
That's a catchy title.
And we have about 50 of these video essays that goes into laborious details about how people achieved and why they achieved, and what lessons can we learn from that. So we want to do that again.
Yeah. So, Bob, some of these stories that you're talking about can be found at the Woodson Center. You have a library.
They can be found on our website. We have examples of people who are achieved against the odds. We are working with Pepperdine right now so that scholars and students well into the future will begin a whole new course of study. And that is, there's nobody right or left of center that ever writes constructively about what low-income people are doing to help themselves. There's no place you can go to get that kind of information. But we want to start a whole new discipline.
Wow. And so Pepperdine is the organization that's going to help you to do that.
Pepperdine University is working with us. Dean Pete Peterson is working with us. They have agreed to to house our archives. In fact, all of our physical assets have been digitized, and they're on their way to Pepperdine so that students well into the future will be able to. So we have to persuade funders to fund our grassroots Josephs, the people living in these communities. They deserve to get funded. We're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on political campaigns. They're going to spend money. Everybody on the right of center is against big government, but they're going to spend big billions of dollars getting people elected to big government.
Wow, man, you have nailed so many questions I have had. I have just been blessed with listening to all of these kernels of wisdom today, and I don't know if I've ever listened to anybody quite like you before, Bob. And what a true gem you are, and I just want to thank you for everything you've shared. And we got just a couple more questions. What would you want your family or your children or your community to say about you, and what would you want them to remember about you as a person, as a leader?
That's an interesting question. That I believe that everybody has a God-given capacity to be agents of their own uplift. That nobody should be defined by the worst of what they used to be. We ought to be defined by what we aspire to be. Also, I want them to understand that experience will always prevail against an argument. That if I'm trying to persuade someone about the value of life, self-determination, and the values of America, what I believe in self-determination, I believe in pietas, patriotism, love of God, love of neighbor, love of country. And there are those who are trying to destroy those values. I believe that the way you protect those values is to point to individuals who's using those values as the foundation upon which they are living their life. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm talking about when that experience will always prevail against an argument, like what Jesus did with the servants of John the Baptist when they came to him and said, "Are you the one, or do we seek another?" He didn't say, "Wasn't I born on Christmas?" or pull out his resume. He healed in their presence and said, "Go tell him what you saw." Well, that's what we need to do. Are these values that upon what this nation, are they worth defending? Ask that person who was a drug addict, who spent time in prison, but God, through Jesus Christ, touched his life, and now he is a contributing member to his family and to his country. Ask him whether these values are of any use. The other legacy I want to leave, that a witness is more powerful than an advocate. If you want people to believe in the values, then live your life by those values. I've had gang members living in my home, and they have gone out to dinner with my wife and my children and my son and his family. So they saw two generations of people sitting at a dinner table in a restaurant having dinner. I had 5 of them at one table, and I've done this several times. So they need to see what a family looks like.
Wow, Bob.
And so we need to witness more to people and stop preaching to them. People want to see a sermon. They're tired of hearing sermons. So everything in our life should be in the service of helping people to be all that they can be. But one other final thing that I want to say is that in order to do that, you have to empty yourself of self-importance.
Mm.
It's a cleansing process. I tell everybody I have on my wrist a Mickey Mouse watch to remind myself that I don't take myself too seriously. Whenever I'm on a television show or I'm being honored, which I don't like that much, I remind myself that I'm a stand-in for the least of these. That
Wow.
mother who's raising her children in a homeless shelter has accomplished a lot more than Bob Woodson has. And so I
Bob.
hope whatever acknowledgement that I get, that I can use it to promote heroes among the least of these.
Wow. Wow. Outstanding. I am so inspired, and I thank you. This has been a great time listening to you again. And every time I listen to you, I gain more insight and wisdom that I can use for my own personal life. So, Bob, I'm hoping that the people that are listening to this, that are seeing this, will find the same treasures that I found in reading your books and listening to you. And I just wish you well. I mean, you've done some wonderful, wonderful work. And I hope and pray that God continues to bless you, you and your family. And, that you continue to lead like you're leading. You're leading
Well, thank you
powerfully.
so much. I'm just blessed that he is keeping me alive for some reason. I don't know why. Because it was left up to me, I'd have been out of here years ago, given the stupid stuff that I did as a young person.
Well, he kept you alive to be on our show, Fulfilling the Dream. That's
right.
what I'll say. I'll take ownership and credit for that. So
well,
thank you,
I'm blessed
Bob.
for that.
Yeah. So thank you. And we'll hope to see you soon again. And you take care of yourself. And we look forward to, again, another time where we can listen and learn. So thank you, everyone, for being out there for us today. We'll sign off, and we'll look forward to talking to you again about those who in community make dreams come true in life. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Fulfilling the Dream with Wayman Brett, the podcast that gives you courage and confidence to fulfill your dreams. Discover the riveting personal account of Wayman's journey in his book, Fulfilling the Dream, My Path to Leadership and Finding Purpose Through Serving Others. Available in print and audiobook. If you haven't done it yet, subscribe to Fulfilling the Dream wherever you get your podcast. Share this episode with others. If you think you don't know them well enough, do it anyway. Be bold. Make a connection. And if you have a powerful story to tell, let us hear it. To get connected, visit fulfillingthedreampodcast.com.